Hello and welcome to another edition of Agenda 2063 TV show, the only show in Ghana, the region and the continent where we're telling you authentic stories about Agenda 2063, the AU and its institutions. So even though we're spending the better part of the series talking a little bit about the African Continental Free Trade Area, we will still always be getting back to Agenda 2063 because at the end of the day, that is the mother of all conversations around Africa. Thank you. My name is Emmanuel K. Benson Jr. I'm your regular host. Happy to be with you once again in your living rooms, in your laptops and so on. We'll take a break and we'll be right back. Welcome back from the break, and today we're going to be talking in APRM Watch segment. We're going to be educating our followers and listeners about the very important role that the APRM is building along the emerging program on gender. Now, after the Africa Governance Report, which consolidated launch was done in Nairobi in December 2019, arguably the most important publication coming from that Midrand-based institution is the African Peer Review Mechanism study on gender governance and peace building. And I'm just going to give you a few takeaways which will help set the scene so that from next week going, we'll go a bit more concretely into some of the discussions. First of all, it was in November 2019 that Kigali, Rwanda, hosted the first ever APRM Gender Forum. You can find out more about it under the hashtag APR Gender Forum, which trended in Rwanda at the time. It's very easy to find it on Twitter and Facebook. Entitled The Nexus Between Gender, Governance and Peace Building, the discussions at that time were focused on durable solutions for women refugees, IDPs, that's internally displaced peoples, and returnees. Now, the statistics are telling us that by November 2017, there are about 15 conflict situations in Africa, all exhibiting the crime of trafficking in women. Violent conflict, which was sadly a part of the reality of Africa, remains the most important trigger for forced displacement, resulting in a high level of women IDPs. Now, in the conversation on gender and peace building, one personality, Graça Michel, is an unsung heroine, and we're mentioning her for a reason, because in November 2016, she led an early warning study in Kenya, reporting findings about pending conflict during elections. When violence broke out, however, it was Kofi Annan, very well respected, and the late Kofi Annan, very venerated, that we all respect. He was the one who was chosen instead of her, despite the fact that she was an obvious choice to head the peacekeeping team. This lack of acknowledgement reminds us of the importance of continuing to advocate for the space for women to play critical roles in peacekeeping, especially one that is in furtherance of Aspiration 3 of Agenda 2063 that speaks to an Africa of good governance, human rights, and the respect for rule of law. Now, finally, we recall that the APRM's mandate was extended by the 28th AU Assembly Heads of States and Governments to include tracking of the implementation of the continent's key governance initiatives and monitoring of the implementation of the AU Agenda 2063 and SDGs and Agenda 2030. So it is in this vein that the APRM has undertaken reviews of countries' governance, policies and practices, working with civil society organizations, the private sector, and state institutions to diagnose governance challenges. One of them, evidently, is the inclusiveness of women, and we hope to be elaborating on that over the next couple of weeks, where we will continue to unpack this all-important monitoring while also seeking to update you with the latest activities the Africa Peer Review Mechanism is engaged in. Thank you for giving us your time. We'll take a break and we'll be right back with the next segment. Welcome back from the break and to another exciting edition of Ear on East Africa. Given the exciting edition from last week, I'm not surprised that you rushed to come and take a look at this one. Now, in today's edition of the segment, we're going to be taking a look at the latest stories trending in the Twitter sphere, what's happening on Twitter and so on. And here are a couple that may tickle your fancies. Number one, Hope Health Action, some NGO working on development, has reported that there are about hundreds of thousands of people leaving their homes in search of food insecurity. This is because of the floods, locusts, and some level of insecurity that is happening in the East Africa region, sadly. A reason for which we hope that they'll be able to sort it out as soon as possible. East African Community has approved $105 million for the 2020-2021 budget. Now, this is important because a long time that East African Community had been dogged with problems and challenges, staff leaving and all these other issues, but now there's some positive development that at least some money will be flowing in, whether it's through donors or otherwise, at least there's some money coming to that organization. And during the next financial year, the East Africa Community is actually going to be focusing on 7 global priority areas, which include consolidation of the single customs territory to cover all imports and intra-East Africa Community traded goods. Now, this is good because African Continental Free Trade Area is coming. It's on its way. Whether it's January 2021 or otherwise, that will happen. It's coming. And so, therefore, regional economic communities need to prepare themselves. Infrastructure development. East Africa, as a lot of you will well know, is very well developed as far as infrastructure is concerned. Something that a lot of us in West Africa we can also learn from. And they are going to be focusing on that as part of their focus areas in the East Africa Community. But also, another bit will be the enhancing free movement of all factors of production and other areas of cooperation among and across partner states as envisaged under the Common Market and Monetary Union protocols. Now, this is important because free movement, as we in West Africa well know, where we don't have to have a visa before we can go to Nigeria, Togo, Benin, and all these things, is very important in East Africa as well. They've been doing it for quite a while, even though in West Africa we are leading since 1979. But their economic integration now allows just common ID cards and, from national ID cards to be used to cross the border. Free movement is as important to them as it is to us in West Africa. And therefore, it's not surprising at all that East Africa Community wants to focus that attention to make sure that they consolidate those gains that they've made. Now, the other bad news, sadly, is that the U.S. has raised the travel alert levels for Kenya and other East African states because of COVID issues. And I hope that they'll be able to sort that out. But on COVID still, East Africa's rate is a bit lower than ours in West Africa. East Africa now has 91,833 cases, as opposed to, wait for it, West Africa, we have over 100,000 cases, specifically 141,369 cases of COVID. Of course, West Africa is a larger region than East Africa, so I think we can forgive them for these figures. And Southern Africa, on the other hand, I think our mind is exploding with the Southern African figures. Southern Africa, 593,577 cases, as opposed to West Africa's 141,369 cases. Well, finally, to end on a good news is that international flights have resumed all over East Africa. In West Africa, you may recall a couple of weeks ago, ECOWAS was supposed to have given July, third week of July, for all ECOWAS borders to open. Sadly, it has not happened. But we do know that last week, Togo opened their borders, Benin is also opening, Cote d'Ivoire is also opening. We are yet to hear anything about Ghana opening its international borders. But at least in East Africa, the flights are resuming with COVID's particular attention being paid in COVID. And the irony of it all is that there are flights from Kenya to Ghana, and yet Ghana has not opened its borders yet. So I'm not quite sure how that one is going to happen. But Kenya and Rwanda opened their borders this week, joining Tanzania and Ethiopia that have already been running theirs. And we know that Ethiopia Airlines has been doing cargo things since COVID started, and so that's been running for quite a while. So on that happy note, and also praying that Ghana opens its borders soon, we bring an end to this all-important segment and hope to give you more good stories around East Africa and the region. My name is Emmanuel K. Benson Jr. I'm a regular host for this show, and today I'm bringing you a very special edition of the show, an edition where I'm talking a lot and giving you some insights into why editorial will feel that it's important to have a conversation on Africa's A game, what we entitle Africa's A game, the Abuja Treaty, APRM, and AfCFTA. Now, they're all A's, and the whole idea, of course, is that it's no coincidence that they're all A's, underscoring the excellence that is buried inside Africa that we do not often talk about. But it's really all about 4 editorials and 1 story. But today, in this episode, I'm seeking to set the scene on why I believe that Africa's A game is important and why these 3 institutions or 3 elements are important to help unpack this so-called Africa A game. But let's start off with a quotation. Benjamin Franklin, venerated U.S. Statesman, said, "Think of these 3 things: whence you came, where you are going, and to whom you must account." In my view, the Abuja Treaty tells us whence we came. The Africa Peer Review Mechanism tells us where we are going. And the African Continental Free Trade Area, or AfCFTA, tells us to whom we must account. Let me quickly explain. The Abuja Treaty is a living document which governs the way AU member states are running at the moment. It's been running since 1991, or at least it was signed in 1991, but operationalized in 1994, and it's a very living document. How do we know it's living? It's a living document because it tells the story of continental integration in 6 important steps: 3 regional, 3 continental. Now, the first phase is about strengthening the regional economic communities and creating new ones in regions where they do not exist. That has already been done. Phase 2 tells us about ensuring consolidation within each REC with a focus on liberalizing tariffs, removing non-tariff barriers, and so on and so forth. That has also, to a large extent, been done. And finally, setting up in each regional economic community a free trade area and customs union. That has been done with varying successes. But now we are in stage 4. The stage 4, 5, and 6 are regional perspectives of the Abuja treaties that help us understand the continental integration that we're supposed to get by 2034. Now we're in 2020, and we have 14 more years before we get to the so-called Africa Economic Community, because the Abuja Treaty is what tells us, what guides us towards the African Economic Community, where we have a West Africa Economic Community, North Africa, Central Africa, East Africa, and then Southern Africa Economic Community. That has not happened yet. And later I explain why that may not happen yet. But first of all, we need to understand basically what the Abuja Treaty is. So the Abuja Treaty is a living document, the long and short of it. Now, for the Africa Peer Review Mechanism started off in 2003, and I've explained in previous editions, and it started off in Ghana. Ghana was one of the first countries to do the peer review, and it's part of what they call the Midrand institutions. That is to say, the institutions of the African Union that are based in South Africa, Midrand specifically. Africa Peer Review Mechanism shares an office with NEPAD, or now what we call NEPAD AUDA, which is the AU, African Union Development Agency. Then there's the Pan-African Parliament, which is supposed to be the voice of the African peoples. But the Pan-African Parliament was actually set up about 10 years earlier than scheduled in 2000. It was supposed to have been set up in 2014 as per Abuja Treaty, but it was set up much earlier. So it's quite sad, in my view, that we still have not gotten to the stage where laws that are made at the Pan-African Parliament are binding. That needs to quickly happen. In fact, the Pan-African Parliament has been doing something about that, but it's still too slow. And of course, it's in the vested interests and in the interest of a lot of member states that are not too keen on openness to make sure that decisions taken at the Pan-African Parliament are not binding on them. It makes sense. No one wants to have that much accountability on them, especially from the African Union. But if ordinary people like us have anything to do about it, it needs to happen sooner than later. And we believe that shows like this will help spur that discussion. Now, we talked about the APRM, we've talked about Abuja Treaty. Now, the third point is about AfTA, the AfTA, African Continental Free Trade Area. Of course, that's a free trade area itself, cannot do anything, but there's a secretariat which is in Ghana now, and we read the other day that Parliament has ratified, so it has now become a diplomatic institution of the African Union. Handing over is going to be taking place very soon, and it will transform Ghana into the latest diplomatic capital after Addis Ababa, Nairobi, and all these other capitals that we hear do a lot of conferences and so on and so forth. But what is important about this is not so much these AU organs as the fact that all of these speak to Africa's economic integration that has been found wanting for decades. Simply put, we've talked so much and so much and so much more all over the years, or at least our leaders have, that our economic integration, we've talked it into existence sometimes. Whilst we talk it into existence, we have peace and conflict issues. We've had some Somalia, we've had all these other issues, Boko Haram, all these other conflicts that we've had to deal with. In West Africa, our own West Africa, we've had Liberia. 25th August will be exactly 30 years since ECOMOG troops under Nigeria, Ghana, and Senegal went into West African state of Liberia to ensure that those troops get rid of Charles Taylor. The war would last for 7 years and include another war in Sierra Leone. So it was Liberia and then Sierra Leone between 1990 and 1997. Reason for which we had so many Liberians come to Ghana many years ago to settle in Budumburam, not far from here, near the central region of Accra, because they were fleeing the horrors of Liberia. Ghana played an instrumental role, as did Nigeria. Nigeria spent a lot of resources, 70% of its own internal resources, to make sure that ECOMOG had been beefed up to launch an offensive force to make sure it got rid of Charles Taylor. So whilst those conflicts were raging and member states were speaking Africa's economic integration into existence, something was actually happening. We had the Abuja Treaty that had been running for quite a while. And the Abuja Treaty is perhaps the biggest reminder that African member states actually had a plan to beef up our economic integration. But what it also says about the A game is that it speaks to a certain level of planning that Africa has been accused of not having for decades as well. Before the Abuja Treaty, there was the Lagos Plan of Action, which was a similar project, but which was not as well elaborated as the Abuja Treaty. But the Abuja Treaty has been quite simple for everyone to understand when you go back to the history books: 3 regional, 3 continental. And the steps have been followed, and we've kept pretty much up to date. We're on stage 4, almost on time. 2017 was the time when the African Continental Free Trade Area was supposed to be established. And yet here we are in 2018, 2019. We are on track with the African Continental Free Trade Area, even though back then, when it was conceptualized, it was not called the African Continental Free Trade Area. It was called Continental Free Trade Area. That's just the name. That's not so important as the fact that the plan has, developed pretty well. So what we're trying to do with this editorial is to say that, set the scene and to say that this is the first part of 4 shows that is seeking to underscore the AU as a global player. Believe it or not, the AU can be, in my view, the AU is already a global player. It's made tremendous strides on peace and security. Right today, a lot of countries are under democratic rule, a lot more than we ever imagined 20 years ago. And in West Africa, our own very West Africa, where we had horrors of Liberia, Sierra Leone, and so on and so forth, almost all the member states are under democratic rule. And civil societies, organizations such as one based here in Ghana, have been behind the scenes pushing the ECOWAS institutions to ensure that there is a two-term rule for member states who are part of ECOWAS, and that has been going very well. That is a plus for West Africa that we do not always talk about. The inclusion of civil society, pushing hard on, our policymakers to make sure that things happen. And would you believe that even just here, the M Plaza Hotel, not far from here in Accra, was where the last meeting in 1993-94 took place, populated by women who were tired of the war and the excesses that are taking place in Liberia. They grouped and said, we are tired that so much conflict has gone on in West Africa and we need to stop. And the ECOWAS leaders were there at the time. They listened to the women. Some meetings took place in Akosombo, a popular place of retreat here in Ghana for meetings and conferences, and other meetings took place all over, and some of it was spearheaded by former President Jerry John Rawlings as well. He played quite an instrumental role in bringing people together, mobilizing support, bringing them to make sure that they sat down on the table alongside with ECOWAS leaders to talk and bring an end to that conflict. The irony of it all with peace and security and West Africa is that it is the hard men of West Africa that seem to want conflict to end in West Africa. You had the Yademas, you had the General Gowons, all these were military people. You have Rawlings, military people, yet they wanted to see an end to a conflict in Liberia because without peace and security, we could not have democratic rule, we could not have governance, good governance, which we are all speaking to. I spoke earlier today about Aspiration 3 of Agenda 2063, which talks about respect for human rights, rule of law, and good governance. That is all stories that we already know. And so there is an important tale to tell about Africa's A game. It's about, whilst we're pushing for economic integration, but we're also ending conflicts. And irony of it all is that this year is the year where they talk about silencing the guns. And silencing the guns, sadly, has been silent because Corona came to disturb it all. So those who wanted to put their guns down realized that some greater problem was disturbing them, for which reason they needed the masks and all these other things at the expense of guns. Well, of course, on a lighter note, you could say that the pandemic of Corona has forced people to forget their guns and concentrate on getting well and concentrate on staying alive rather than, picking up a gun and going to fight in a war. So in that respect, you could say this silencing the guns is not totally dead. But the biggest issue for us is that the AU remains a global player. And it remains a global player because of some of these developments that have taken place, some of these institutions. So let's quickly, because of time, just go into what I call the comparison illusion. Then I'll move into a part where I call wreaking positive havoc with the Rex. That is where we'll conclude this episode, and then set the scene for the next editorial. That will explain more concretely the relevance of the Abuja Treaty in consolidating Africa's A game. So, the comparison illusion, the history books, and to Google, you will find that AU member states decided that the African Union Development Agency would be a kind of development agency of the African Union that would be pushing Agenda 2063, that would be pushing all these other AU things that we like to talk about. And so, NEPAD AUDA is part of the so-called mid-range institutions that include the Pan-African Parliament and include the Africa Peer Review Mechanism as well. And so when you look at it from that context, you realize that when we talk about the Africa Peer Review Mechanism, Africa Peer Review Mechanism, which mandate has been expanded, as I explained earlier, to include monitoring Agenda 2063, to also include pushing forth on democratic governance. Africa is actually on the right track. Africa's A game is developing, it's forming, and it's important that we continue to push that A game forth to remind up-and-coming generation that even though we have had challenges, and we continue to have challenges. We look at West Africa, almost all democratic governance. Leaders are under democratic rule. Sure, we had issue with Togo between 2017 and 2018, reason for which our President Akufo-Addo, together with some other West African leaders, were dispatched up and down Togo to go and find out what they could do to break that impasse. Despite all the challenges, Togo is now at peace. Yes, Yadama has been elected, much to the chagrin of a lot of civil society people, but at least Togo is at peace. Togo is taking care of the people, its governance and so on and so forth. And it has promised that once it finishes this current rule, it will step down. So what that says to us is that a region like West Africa has gotten it right in making sure that democratic governance is going. And the democratic governance, and whilst it's working on democratic governance, it's working on economic integration as well. Economic integration for the longest time has been Africa's problem. And so when you look at the Abuja Treaty, when you look at things like the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, and the two of them, you realize that it's still talking about economic integration, how we make the continent better for our people, how we can trade better across the continent so that ordinary people, small and medium-sized enterprises, can take advantage of a continental initiative and be able to make a better life for their people. Then you realize that Africa's A game is actually on track. Because, sure, any institution is built by people and with people. And institutions do not run themselves. It is the people that run these institutions. But when you look at the history of these institutions, the history of these plans, and you align them to how far they have come, and you realize that something good is happening, you have to celebrate it. And that's why, for this editorial, we believe that celebrating the continent, celebrating the AU as a global player is so critical. Look at the fact that we have brilliant young men and women doing great stuff here at the Association of African Universities as well itself, running the setup, the TV to make sure, doing brilliant shows, Health Afrique, Educational Watch, and all these other things, and this show to make sure that you project the voice of higher education in Africa. Who would have thought 10 years ago things like this could happen? So consolidating Africa's A game, there are a number of unsung heroes along the way. Really, and we cannot talk about all of them in an editorial like this, but it is important to occasionally slip it in to remind viewers, followers, and listeners that Africa, for its challenges, is on track. Yes, we'll have issues in our own countries where we may have issues with our parliamentarians, with our governments, the way they lead things, their policies, and so on and so forth. But things are on the right track. And the regional economic communities, which I spoke to earlier, are also doing great things, but there are challenges also with that. The regional economic communities, I've talked about ECOWAS, I've talked about East Africa Community briefly as well. And I think those probably are the two regional economic communities that are doing probably quite well. SADC, on the other hand, in my view, has challenges. SADC is haunted by the ghost of the history of great personalities like Mugabe, Zimbabwe's Mugabe, and all these other people who led the liberation struggle in the Southern African region many decades ago. And reason for which some of us see that they're not moving as dynamically as they should move. So when I talk about the wreaking positive havoc on the Rex, I'm talking about how after, now that African Continental Free Trade Area is here, how it's going to help change the regional economic communities, those who lead it, to have a reflection on what they can do better to improve their regional economic community. When Corona hit, some of us on the sidelines were campaigning privately and sometimes publicly to ensure that Southern African Development Community, SADC, would also have a health institution, because now Corona is all about health, public health. West Africa, we were doing quite well in discussing Corona. We have a West Africa Health Organization, which is in Burkina Faso. It was set up in 1987. It's 30 years plus, offering updates of developments around Corona. Allied to that is the regional Center for Disease Control based in Abuja as well, which together with West Africa Health Organization, we're putting together statistics and data on member states, the corona cases and so on and so forth. At least in West Africa, we have a health institution at the regional level that helps to speak to the issue that a healthy population, a healthy region leads to healthy democratic governance and so on. But do we find the same in SADC? Do we find the same in East Africa Community? East Africa Community has an East Africa Health Research Commission based in Burundi. The fact that it's already based in Burundi, which has been struggling for many decades on democratic governance, speaks volumes. A lot of people say that health institution is already dead. But what about SADC? SADC does not have a health institution. SADC has a health protocol that has been around since 1999. So some of us were pushing on Twitter when Dr. Tax, who is the head of SADC, came on and was talking about extolling the virtues of SADC, how it's done well managing corona. And some of us were wondering, yeah, you're managing corona, but you don't have a consolidated position on dealing with corona. Why is it that West Africa has health institutions, East Africa has something like it, but you in SADC, you are still living in HIV times? The health protocol spoke to HIV issues. How come it has not been upgraded to a health institution? So for some of us, that for me is an example of the regional economic communities, how challenges, crises, and new developments help force regional economic communities to have positive havoc wreaked on them. And so even as I praise the positive havoc of the African Continental Free Trade Area coming to change and coming to be the game changer for how we manage our regional economic communities, Corona has already come to do that. Now that Corona is around, a lot of regional economic communities are compelled to pay greater attention and offer more money to the health budget, much more than they were doing before. And so these are some of the things that help remind us that Africa has a plan and it is still consolidating its A game. But we still need to do a lot better than we are doing. The A game will not happen out of the air and without people pushing, without civil society, without ordinary people talking. We need to do a great deal better by talking about it, having shows like this, having debates, having conversations privately and publicly in our homes, with our lawmakers and parliaments and so on and so forth, to make sure that now that the Continental Free Trade Area is here, the Secretariat is here in Ghana, and Ghana, Accra will be the new home diplomatic capital that will offer jobs and opportunities to a lot of people and will become the African World Trade Organization over time. What is it that we all in our individual ways can help do to strengthen Africa's A game? For me, it has and will be about strengthening, reminding people about the path that we have come on, the Abuja Treaty, from whence we came, through to the APRM, where we are going, democratic governance, and finally to the African Continental Free Trade Area, to whom we must account, because the Agenda 2063 is strongly embedded in the African Continental Free Trade Area. So, in summary, these are the important points that we want to point out in this first editorial, looking at Africa's A game. Africa is doing well, but it can do better. It needs civil society. It needs a lot more discussion, conversations, and pressure. But we must remember how far we have come and where we are going, and we've made great strides. So we must continue. But we must also continue by understanding our history. And that is why in the next editorial, we'll be looking a bit more about the centrality and the importance of the Abuja Treaty and why we need to understand it and use it to be able to hold our leaders a little bit more accountable, because it is a living document and people need to understand it. It shouldn't just be another thing understood by technocrats of the African Union Commission. We must all understand it. And so for us, we feel that we can use another show to help people better understand the Abuja Treaty, the Africa Peer Review Mechanism, and then finally we'll conclude with why the African Continental Free Trade Area needs to be the game changer that will empower and transform all our lives in manifold ways in which we could ever have imagined. Thank you for taking time to listen to me talk all this time, and I hope that the next editorial will be able to have a lot more interesting perspectives as well as that I've been able to put into this one. Thank you for taking time out. My name is A.K. Benson Jr., your regular host for the Agenda 2063 TV show. Hope to speak with you next time. Have a great day, and don't forget to put your comments that are rolling up on the screen. Thank you, and goodbye.